Great, and now we have some time for questions. And I must say that one of the things that I found by preparing for this panel, I should first explain the NISO Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee is one of 3 topic committees for NISO, and they're charged with overlooking the landscape of what's emerging among libraries and publishers and information providers to see where are there opportunities where some best practices or some standards could in fact truly make the market more effective. And so our particular remit is in the whole area of discovery and delivery. I was, but just preparing for this panel, I found that the material around OER was so different than any of the skill sets on our current committee that I've recommended to the NISO executive that they add an OER person to the discovery committee. So I think this has been useful just in that regard. So you should use a microphone, ask your questions, and we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Bert.
Well, I just have to ask this question. Bert Corelli, Trend MD. So, Letty, you wrote a wonderful article a couple of years ago about recommender systems in general,
Yes.
Relational systems, and one was mentioned for books. I wonder if you would talk about recommenders more in general in relation to open access.
Well, you know, it makes me think about the portion of John's grid, and maybe we can go back to your generic version.
Yeah.
All the way through the deck. You know, it's a really good question. I don't know that, again, assuming the researcher perspective, right? Because I'm a strong believer in the need for publishers to stay dialed into the jobs that need to be done in the scholarly space. So the publisher-supplied links potentially are one area where we can better drive connectivity and linking across OA content. And certainly TrendMD, I know you wanted me to tee that up a little bit for me. TrendMD is certainly a way of going about that. I think one of the issues around recommenders is earning the trust of a reader. So if a recommender is operating simply on usage, the last 3 people that landed on this page then went off to do X. Most scholars, and the paper that Bert was referring to is a study that I did in 2014 and 2015, asking about trust and asking what propels you to follow a recommended link. Pure usage alone doesn't sway the scholars that I was talking to. I was focused in the social sciences. It was just my former life at Sage. And the thing that did matter is an actual expert curation. So I think it probably touches into the sort of solution space that I mentioned toward the end of my talk, where you know, we sort of need to get a little more creative about the user experience and the user pathways, and it isn't simply a matter of just pushing out, you know, 15 other recommendations that have a similar semantic profile, or even worse, potentially just the same keywords that the author has chosen, but actually get smarter about what scholars are finding relevant. The contextual recommendation is a much more powerful way to go.
I've actually also looked at a variety of the recommendation systems, and they follow the same opinion I was raising about links with publishers, which is they're not helping people find other versions other than the article of record. So from a standpoint of getting that from the 10 or 20 links down to 2 links, it's the same sort of question. And I didn't mention at the beginning that actually when I talked about publisher links, a lot of the pieces are there. They're open source material from things like the OA button, OA DOI, the unpaywall, Dissemin, the Signaling OA-ness project from Wikipedia. If you are trying to build this sort of link that would immediately give a person a sense that, boy, within 1 or 2 links, I'll be at a version I can read. Some of the technology has already been built. As people have to put it together and test its usability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A couple of things Letty said I think are very interesting in this space. So, I mean, there is a category of things that are basically recommendation engines, but not of the sort that we generally think about in book space. Things like Goodreads, right? And Amazon is the recommender system to topple recommender systems. But the interesting thing about those is, firstly, Letty, you mentioned, we need to think in open access about getting beyond the scholar, beyond the researcher. What are the natural recommender systems that they're going to, and it may tend to lie outside our natural ecosystem. And the second thing is, Amazon is beset by the same problem that the jobbers are beset by, in terms of Amazon makes its, a small amount of its money out of selling books now, but it is a sales model. And so the way in which open access books can work on Amazon is still very much in evolution. But we're really lacking the biggest book channel in open access book space because of Amazon not really playing nicely in this space.
No, I think, Charles, you mentioned to me when we talked beforehand that there was, for a jobber like YBP, it costs them $150 to score a title. And the scoring is very sophisticated that goes into an approval plan. So who's going to pay for that for the open book? Is it, yeah.
I would just follow on something that Charles said a moment ago as far as the recommender systems. I really feel like there's I want to say disciplinary, but I think outside the scholarly space, it's just more topical. So I have a new client who wants to bring, essentially translate some academic content into, sort of a more, consumer space. And we're starting with just some basic information, seeking research, just basically where are people going? And in this context is prenatal nutrition. So where are mothers going to, learn what nutritional facts they need during their pregnancy and post. And you do have to begin by assuming the perspective of that information user and that consumer and thinking about getting your content in the places where they go. We are well beyond the build it and they will come era.
Sorry, it's an interesting dialogue. Just one other thing I wanted to share from the Mapping the Free eBook supply chain project is that over 50% of the survey respondents identified that the book they had acquired, the open access book, was for personal use. And then we had a number of free text fields, and they sort of dug into that a bit more. And it is really true that this kind of the educated lay reader does appear to be appearing in really almost like stereotyped ways. I am a retired judge and I wish to get back to the classics that I always loved.
Nice.
A real quote, right? I mean, absolutely amazing. It's like they exist. But the way they're coming across the content is definitely through topical search. They're not searching for open access content. They're just coming across this material.
That's right.
And the other thing is, the role of translation may not be quite as important in some of these humanities fields, in that, these are pretty deep niche people who are able to understand fairly specialist literature, which is, because university presses, etc., do this, is written reasonably accessibly as well.
Another plug for SEO.
Yeah.
Questions? Come on.
John, if you want, I could just make a quick comment about recommender systems in OER. All right. So in Merlot, we have editorial boards. So you have the SMEs saying, here is what we think is the most important. And then you have your discovery heuristic, pull all the cream of the crop according to the subject matter experts in those areas. We also have a whole variety of user evaluations, right? The social side of things. Have you used it in a classroom or not, right? Are you a student? Are you a faculty? Are you instructional designer? You're able to pull out the evaluations of all these different groups on these same materials to determine whose recommendations do I want? Because it's not, I think in scholarly publications you have a more homogeneous group. When it comes to instruction, you're all over the place on who you're trying to satisfy. And then you have what people say they like, and then what they actually do in their discovery process on the user behavior. So those are a variety of things that we're using to try to enable people to find what they want in a very short amount of time. Because when it comes to the instructional side of the house, efficiency in discovery is primary. How many faculty say, oh, I have so much time to work on my teaching, right? It's always, they want to spend it on their scholarship. Well, they'll spend hours looking for an article, and you say it's going to take you 5 minutes to find something, and they say that's too much work when it comes to instructional materials. So this makes kind of ways to kind of narrow and get good recommendations in OER for the instructional purpose are a real challenge.
I would say one subset, sorry.
Just get ready, we're only going to have 2 questions when we come back to you, so.
I'm going to have a really long dialogue. But one subset of responses we did see in the survey is faculty members who are very interested in using materials in open courses, in courses. But there's a twist to what they said which really interested me, which is it's not the fact that these choosing a version that's subscribed to by the institution, things like that. They don't have time to wrestle with that. So they're choosing an open resource because there is going to be none of that nonsense. So that struck me.
All right, any one or 2 questions? So this is your chance, otherwise we're...
I can't work out where you're from, Alexa.
I know, I was trying to keep it, under wraps. So my question for the Open Monographs survey, did it ask, like, is there a sense of how aware the users are of the openness of the books? And do you know if we have anywhere any corresponding or counterpart data that would represent what users do to discover non-open books? And I'm kind of asking this because my thinking is this unique to open material, or does it expose, practices that are really much more broad? And in that case, what do we do with all of these, tools that we have put so much time and effort into developing that maybe, going forward, what do we do with those? But that's my...
Well, I would say I think that's a very acute, acute point. Definitely the survey results, it's pretty clear that, and also the follow-up interviews, it's pretty clear that the fact it was open really didn't register particularly for anybody. That's not what they were concerned about. They had come across it as a subject thing, and then they'd realized it was open afterwards. I think it is absolutely right to say that these are issues, the behavior in the open monograph space is not that different from the behavior in the ebook space. And Frank Smith from JSTOR gave an earlier presentation, some of you may have seen, where they were looking at the usage data they've got from the open access books on JSTOR, and his point was that it's almost identical to the usage behavior they're seeing with the gated access books, with the exception that that the numbers are bigger because fewer people are being turned away, and also with the slight exception that people are doing things with the books that go beyond the usual things they do with ebooks because they can. And one of the major things they're doing with the open access books is sharing. And that's something, of course, they're not easily going to be able to do with most gated ebook collections, and it's something they really want to do. But beyond that, they're doing all these myriad different behaviors around that we see with ebooks. They're skimming, they're diving in to look for one particular thing, etc. But the one thing they are wanting to do and can do with open access books is share.
All right, one last question.
This is sort of an unformed question, but it popped into my head when you were talking. I used to say to my boss, was very interested in making money on everything. that the first open access was the public library. Ben Franklin invented it. And I'm lucky enough to have a child who worked at the New York Public Library, which is really very digitized, and therefore I have a card. And it's just incredible what I can get from, and I don't know that I can share it unless I just hand my iPad to somebody, but what impact do you think, I mean, the Library of Congress, oddly, is behind the ball on digitizing, although with the new librarian, I think that's going to change. As more and more libraries people who aren't in academic positions but want to read that sort of stuff, it becomes accessible. How does that work with open access? Because it doesn't have to be an open access published book for the New York Public Library to have it in its circulation. And I think that's, I don't even know what I'm asking, but I guess it's like the impact.
I will say that I think the space of public libraries and open access resources of all of these sorts is really, really interesting. There are these challenges of talking to public libraries about this very new area of activity. There are the challenges of getting these works into the public library systems, which are not accommodated for many of these supply streams. But I do think the work of BiblioBoard in this space is very interesting, and the way in which they're using geolocation in preference to trying to feed the catalogs of public libraries. So, go to the state of Minnesota, and you'll be able to access this great collection of Minnesota ebooks licensed by the state as soon as you cross the state boundary because of the geolocation work. Now, how to get credit for public libraries in that kind of space, and how to make sure that people feel that public libraries have been meaningful in their ability to access this material is going to be a challenge, because we need to get the credit to the public libraries somehow.
All right, well, another round of applause for our panelists.